It's that time again. The annual conference of the American Society of Ag Consultants, otherwise known as ASAC, is going to be held in Fort Myers, Florida, this November 4th and 5th. Kurt Covington is one of 9 professionals who will address the conference. The other speakers who will cover a wide range of topics represent Florida Farm Bureau, Florida Citrus Commission, University of Tennessee Institute of Agriculture, National Ag Law Center, Risk Mitigators and Advisors, Tyler Associates, as well as the lead economist for dairy at CoBank, and myself, Chrissy Wozniak from North American Ag. The day and a half of presentations will be followed by ag tours on Tuesday afternoon at Echo Farms, one of my favorite places here in Fort Myers. Attendees will experience farming at its most creative, with unique demonstrations, plants, and techniques being used to help farmers and urban gardeners in developing countries. A second tour at Echo will showcase simple technologies that can improve food, water, and shelter for millions of people. A third tour of a hydroponic grower is also being planned. For more information and to register, visit www.agconsultants.org. That's www.agconsultants.org. See you there. Welcome to North American Ag Spotlight. I'm Chrissy Wozniak. My guest today has built a robust career in agriculture policy and advocacy. The senior manager of federal government and industry relations at Syngenta brings over 3 decades of experience in lobbying for farm programs, crop insurance, conservation, and credit. She has a distinguished background that includes spearheading initiatives on farm data security and privacy, and serving in key roles such as president of the Ag Data Transparency Evaluator and secretary of the Ag Data Coalition. Additionally, her tenure in the Bush administration and her roots as a 5th-generation Iowa farmer underscore her deep connection to and understanding of the ag sector. She'll also be speaking at the Women in Agribusiness Summit this fall in Denver on the topic of key policy and trade concerns for U.S. agribusiness in 2024 and beyond. Today, we're going to discuss this important topic, and I'm also looking forward to her presentation this year in Denver. So today we are honored to welcome Mary Kay Thatcher. Welcome, Mary Kay, and thank you so much for being here today.
You bet, Chrissy. Nice to be here.
So let's start out with your background. How did you get where you are today?
Well, most people say their life didn't really go the way they planned it, but mine's all been really fairly linear. I grew up on a farm in Iowa, close to Des Moines. I went to Iowa State. I have an ag business, ag econ double major with an ag journalism minor. And then I came out to Washington and did agricultural work for then Senator Jepsen from Iowa, worked for the Farm Bureau lobbying for a few years, worked in the first Bush administration, and now with Syngenta. So the fact is my whole career has been agriculture. I still have a small family farm in Iowa. Don't get much dirt under my nails, but do get to visit with the fellow who helps me out and try to talk about what our planning decisions are. So I still really, really enjoy it. And, it's funny, I was just with a senator from Mississippi, Cindy Hyde-Smith, and, we just were talking about what a great little fraternity agriculture is. It's really a small world everywhere, certainly in Washington, kind of everybody knows everybody, but it's a small world. And it's just, I think, working with farmers and ranchers, they're just the salt of the earth. I couldn't ask for a better career.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, especially about the fraternity. It's, it doesn't matter where you go in the US and in Canada, there's always connections. So a lot's going on, obviously. How have recent policy changes impacted US agribusiness? And what are the most significant issues right now?
Well, I think probably the most significant thing we have is the Chevron decision coming out of the Supreme Court, and nobody really knows how that's going to work out. But in general, the Chevron decision, the overturning of it, said that instead of the requirement that courts had to sort of bow to whatever regulatory bodies came up with, this will allow them to do some overturning on those. And so we look in agriculture to numerous regulations at EPA to figure out, okay, what are the ones that, might have some interpretation changes? What about USDA? There are probably tax issues. nobody really knows yet how just vast that could be. In fact, I think all the committee chairs of the House just sent letters to, for example, U.S. House Ag Senate to Secretary Vilsack at USDA and asked a whole host of questions about, what laws might they consider ought to be reconsidered, et cetera. So it's going to be very interesting to see, what does that package finally end up like? Secondly, it's going to be a real challenge. I mean, certainly we think, as does, I believe, everybody in agriculture, that it's a lot better if we let the Hill write the regulation or the laws and not have as much interpretation. But the fact is, Congress isn't very used to that. They're not used to spending the time to cross every T and dot every I. And they're going to have to get that way now because the Chevron overturn means they're going to have a lot more input into it. So I think that's going to affect a whole lot of things. I think another really big issue, and I wouldn't say that I think it's been dealt with yet in almost any fashion, is just our debt, our deficit. Maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we talked a lot about that, but nobody has paid much attention to it in the last few years, and people continue to pass all kinds of laws and that cost additional money. They may be great laws, but we're getting more and more in debt. I believe that in the next Congress, certainly we're going to have to pass a debt limit again right after they come back from in January and are sworn in, et cetera. But I believe people are going to start paying more attention. So we think about things like there being lots of tax provisions that must be reauthorized next year, things like the estate tax and 1031 exchanges and the 199 exemption for co-ops, et cetera. Well, all those cost money. And so now I think it's going to be even more difficult to figure out how do we deal with those than it was when we originally passed them in 2017. And I think on the spending side, you're going to have something like, it sure doesn't look like the Farm Bill is going to get done this year. I mean, maybe a lame duck. But if it doesn't, we're also going to come back and have this budget reconciliation package, which will cost money. We'll be facing taxes. And I think we're going to be looking at this farm bill and people are going to say, do we have the same amount of money to fund a farm bill in 2025 as we would if we did it in 2024? So just a couple of examples. I mean, you're going to find examples in housing and Medicare and Social Security and everywhere else on this kind of thing. But I think we haven't really dug into the debt and the deficit. And we won't know this answer until we know who's the next president, who controls the House and the Senate, by how big of margins, et cetera, what kind of people are they. But I cannot see a way that we don't spend a lot more time kind of pulling our hair out on where do we find the funding to do things and where do we find the will to cut funding elsewhere.
Yeah, those are some really great points. And let's kind of break those down kind of one by one. I know the Chevron deference that, I think I yahooed when I heard it that day. Just excellent news. I hope. And that kind of brings up, EPA sometimes feels like agriculture's biggest foe, especially when it comes to crop protection. So what are some of those main environmental regulations that are affecting the U.S. farmer and then agribusiness as well? And how are they being managed? And do we have hope coming forward, even because of Chevron deference being overturned?
Well, I wouldn't hold my breath for anything major to happen very fast. I mean, again, I think it's going to take us several months to sort of work out where are we on this Chevron deference and again, asking for input from the agencies and the departments themselves on what they believe is going to be teed up. But, we're here in, the dog days of summer, and we know that the Congress will be out for the whole month of August, and they're going to be out, well, they will have been out for the Republican convention. So the fact is we don't have very much time left. We've got 4 or 5 weeks, maybe, when they come back in September before they're going to go home and campaign in October. So we're not having a lot of time for Congress to do anything. And we're at a point where, of course, we don't know, is Mr. Biden going to win re-election or will it be a Republican administration? And so I don't anticipate EPA doing much of anything that's helpful to agriculture in the next few months. I mean, could they do a quicker job in approving, re-registering and registering new pesticides? Absolutely. We'd love to have that happen. They're going to say they're short of staff and money, which is true. And I think everybody, almost every ag group, and certainly every company like mine, Syngenta, has been lobbying for more money for the Office of Pest Management so that we can indeed move some of these new products along that will be better for farmers and that will be better for the environment, et cetera. But not going to happen soon. I think we have a big issue in dicamba about are they going to approve any uses later. I just can't imagine that happening before the election. Probably not at all in 2024, a decision like that. We've got, okay, the 40B regs came out on sustainable aviation fuel, and now they've got to put out the regs on 45Z. And are they going to make that easier for farmers? Because I think the 40B regs were was a lot of mitigation to do to be able to qualify for that help. Again, I hope that comes out, but pretty iffy. I'm not sure a Democratic administration is going to move forward on some of those issues right now. And, one other interesting point, and this is really kind of policy wonk in the weeds, I guess, Chrissy, but there is a provision in law that says for regulations that were put in place in the last 60 days of an administration, and it's how many days are they actually in session. So it's not like, okay, November, December. Then it's much easier for if you had a Republican House and Senate and president to overturn those regs. So we know we're already in that 60-day period. They're not going to be in session, or it's very, very, very unlikely they would be in session the next in 60 days before January 1st. So a lot of people in the administration also know that, and they know, therefore, there's a really good chance that some of these things could be overturned. And so they're having to reevaluate, how do we really put this out? What kind of political spin do we put on it? Is it worth it, et cetera? So I don't anticipate a lot of regulations that are going to be helpful for farmers being issued prior to the election.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And what about trade? What are the biggest trade concerns that we're facing? I guess it all kind of follows the same theme, but trade
It
is
does.
important.
I mean, trade. We have not, I think this is the correct number. We have not done a new trade agreement in this country, a free trade agreement, in like 14 years. So no, Mr. Biden has not been helpful on that. Mr. Obama wasn't helpful either. We all remember fondly the days when the World Trade Organization worked and we were passing things like China PNTR and USMCA and all this host of things. And we just don't seem to get the appetite in Congress to really get that done. Again, I don't anticipate anything in that manner happening before next year. And then I think it's going to be a real push to get anything there. I mean, we in agriculture, that might be one of the places that I think it's most important for us to be out there lobbying about it, because you think about not necessarily free trade agreements, but both President Biden and former President Trump have talked about wanting to implement more tariffs. Well, that's likely going to drive some inflation in this country. It's likely going to drive some reciprocity on whoever we put tariffs on. They're going to say, well, then let's put tariffs back on the U.S. We remember not that long ago during COVID when tariffs went in and on China, and it killed our soybean market. I mean, we're not sure we'll ever get that total market back. So tariffs are a huge issue, and we need to do better. I think agriculture did so much better on trade issues 10 years ago, where boy, you had coalitions of 50 or 60 groups, and they were out really lobbying on, let's make sure we get a really good trade deal here. And we don't have that. So there's that. And then one other thing I'd throw out about trade is, very closely watching and trying to have lots of input into what's happening with Mexico and them not wanting to take GMO corn, them not wanting to take glyphosate. Certainly the corn thing is a bigger issue. And I think it has to be viewed as very good news that, the gentleman who will be the new Secretary of Agriculture in Mexico, he was appointed by the new president, came out and said, hey, we don't want to do this. We can't stop GE corn from coming in this country. First of all, we need it. We need it to feed the livestock. We can't produce enough. So this has to stop. Well, that's great news. But the new president doesn't take office until October 1st. So even though they say it, they can't overturn a President Obrador decree until that time. I don't anticipate he's going to overturn it. So we have to keep our eye on that. And then certainly we've had the USMCA case where they've had the hearings, they've talked about those things, but we don't have the outcome from that case yet either. So we have to keep the pressure on this U.S. Trade Representative Office and USDA for that matter, to make sure that they continue to move this process along. I think they've been really good the last few months. I think the right things were said at the hearing a few weeks ago when they were trying to figure out who's right or wrong, the US or Mexico, about this, but it's far from being an issue that's resolved. So trade is very multifaceted, I think, with lots of things you have to look out for. Again, I'm probably going to sound like a broken record here, but I don't anticipate a whole lot of things happening in the next few months. I think we probably will get that USMCA case in Mexico. We'll probably get some decision on that. And then they'll have to come back and say, well, okay, if the US is right, which I believe we are, and they win this case, then what kind of monetary penalty are we going to put on? So it's still months away from being resolved, but for the moment, it feels like at least it's going in the right direction.
That's good. That's what I was going to ask, is when do we see that outcome coming? But yeah, it seems like everything is moving slow as molasses right now. And the topic of subsidies can be really polarizing. But can you discuss the role of government subsidies in supporting U.S. agriculture and any proposed changes?
Well, I think that if you look at either Senator Stabenow, the chairwoman of the Senate Ag, her farm bill proposal, or Chairman G.T. Thompson, the Republican who is in charge of the House Ag Committee, his obviously passed through the Ag Committee. It was a bipartisan bill. There were only 4 Democrats that supported it, and all the Republicans. So it was bipartisan, but certainly we would have hoped for more. But both of those bills do improve the PLC program, the ARC program, the crop insurance program for farmers to try to get a better safety net. Both of them address in different ways. What do we do about base acres being so out of whack? They do it in different ways. Certainly a big push for what about young and new farmers that come into it and they have no base? Can that be addressed, et cetera? So I think there is that intent. Now, I don't think the Farm Bill is going to pass this year, but I don't think that we're going to lose the momentum to improve it. Now, again, I'm a little skeptical because I do think when we get to 2025, it's going to be more difficult to get adequate funding for a Farm Bill than it is in 2024. But I think we've had so many red lines in the sand with a member saying, I'm not voting for this Farm Bill unless X, or unless Y, or in some cases, unless X and Y, that I just don't see a way out. Maybe there's people way, way smarter than me that politically will figure out a way to, put those two sides together. But I'm not sure that's the case. So we may indeed be postponed in trying to figure out what that is. I think, though, one of the things in favor of getting a farm bill done, not in favor of farmers, but as you well know, Chrissy, we've got a lot of commodities that the prices just aren't great right now. Big commodities like corn and soy and wheat and cotton. I think if anything, you want to be a cattle producer right now. But so I do think that will drive some action because you always move a farm bill along at a little bit quicker pace, I think, and with a little bit more oomph and changes when things in agriculture are tough. We always say to members of Congress, remember, when you write a farm bill, you're not writing it for the current circumstance, you're writing it for the next 5 years. But invariably, people write it as if the current circumstances are going to continue for 5 years. So if that trend continues, you got to believe agriculture is in a difficult enough time right now with high input prices and high interest rates and not so good commodity prices that Congress is probably going to be a little more generous than they might be if things were really, really good and we were writing this farm bill, say, 2 years ago.
Yeah, that makes sense. And given the stalemate, I guess, with the House and Senate, what are you hearing are some of those key issues where it's just a standstill, gridlock?
There's really two, or however you want to look at it, three major issues. One of them is the SNAP program, Supplemental and Nutrition Assistance, which is what still a lot of people call the food stamp program. And in the 2018 Farm Bill, the writers of the Farm Bill put a provision in there that said every 5 years USDA can go in and they can look at what's called the Thrifty Food Plan, which was just sort of a basic meal of this is what you would anticipate a family of four would eat for a week, right? And then you back that out and then it says, well, then this is the amount of money that these families deserve to get for that benefit. And just like we just talked in the Chevron defense, Congress isn't very good about dotting the T's and or dotting the I's and crossing the T's. So they weren't specific about what they really meant. And while I think they intended it to be updated, at least the Republicans, I don't think they intended that USDA would go as far as they did. So I can talk both sides of this issue. I believe that USDA has not updated the Thrifty Food Plan in 35 years. So one knows that what we eat and how much and, those kinds of things have changed. But on the other hand, it cost about $250 billion over the 10-year Farm Bill. That's the projection. So projection is this Farm Bill is going to cost $1.5 trillion. If that change in the food stamp program hadn't been made, it would be $1.25 trillion. So a pretty big number when you think about it in terms of perspective. So what happened is G.T. Thompson came in and said, I want to make sure, I don't want to roll back any money that's been given out, but I want to make sure that USDA doesn't go in next year or the year after and do the same thing and cost us another $250 billion or whatever. So I'm going to freeze the Thrifty Food Plan idea and say, other than inflation, the costs can't go up. Well, that caused a lot of backlash on the Democratic side saying, oh my goodness, it's only $1.40 a day more. This is not outrageous. We don't want to ever say never again. I would tell you, I believe GT is right. And I believe that Democrats ought to pay more attention to it because I believe there's a real possibility if former President Trump is elected and comes in office, he goes in and just flips a switch at USDA and he undoes everything that the Vilsack administration just did. So if I was a Democrat, I would be hedging my bet against, well, if Trump wins, I don't want to lose what I already got. But again, if I come back to how much politics is going on, and those big red lines, most Democrats have drawn such big red lines in the sand, they can't cross it anymore. And they've been so vocal about it. So a very long explanation and a very complex topic, especially for farmers and ranchers who don't pay a whole lot of attention to SNAP. But as you can well imagine, it is just, the issue just brims over and has made it a very partisan deal. And I would say the second thing is the money that came through the Inflation Reduction Act and put a good amount of money, $27-30 billion, something like that, into conservation programs, but said that money has to be spent for conservation programs that ensure climate smart agriculture. And there is I don't know, I'm going to tell you $13-15 billion of that money left. And so in general, if you look at Republicans, they'd like to move that money and either put it into other conservation programs that might not be just targeted for climate friendly ag, or put it into higher support prices for farmers. I mean, I don't think there's any real agreement on how that money would be spent, but there's a lot of agreement on, hey, we'd like to change that. And especially Senate Ag Committee Chairwoman Stabenow, that was her baby in the Inflation Reduction Act. She feels very, very good about the amount of money. Everybody feels good about the additional money that we were able to get for conservation, but she feels really strongly that it should be spent only on climate smart. So again, it's a very big line between, again, mostly Democrats and mostly Republicans, which has led, whether you think about that or the SNAP bill, to some pretty partisan fights in Congress, more than you're usually getting when you do a farm bill. So certainly this farm bill is a lot harder than the previous one, but the previous one was harder than the one before that, et cetera. And I suspect we'll continue to do this for a while. But without a doubt, I would tell you this is my 9th farm bill. This is by far the most partisan bill.
Right. Well, I guess with culture just getting more and more divided, it makes sense that everything would be and all policy would be. But yeah, I hope we can put farmers first and stop any extremist ideology. Kind of halt that. I was in.
Yep.
I met with American Agriwomen at EPA and USDA and just last month,
Yes.
and you can see ideology in the people you meet with, and
Yeah.
my hope is that we can kind of like quell that ideology and really focus on the issues and get back to normality and really talking
Yeah.
about what's best for farmers, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what are some your main concerns about labor policy?
Well,
Is there some hope? I know, H-2A program is so important, so that brings in immigration as well into labor. Are you seeing anything in your crystal ball?
no, people are going to go, this is the most depressing person I've ever met. But I just don't see, I mean, labor is even less likely, in my opinion, than the Farm Bill. And again, I mean, first of all, I don't think we have the answer yet. We haven't come to a point where we could, but even if we're close, and I think there have been some bills that have been introduced that have gotten us a whole lot closer. But I think, again, we got an election coming up in a few months, and there are many, many Republicans who say, I don't want to do anything about immigration. I don't want to do anything about the Mexican border. I think we want to use that issue against Joe Biden as he's running for president. So Congress, don't do it. I wouldn't bet a nickel that we could move any kind of immigration labor bill this year.
Yeah. So then let's switch then into something more positive that can affect labor, and that's technology and innovation. So that's a big part of what your life has been about too. So tell me some of those opportunities, I guess, that are ahead.
Well, I think that again, when we get a farm bill, there's some good things. There are several provisions in there that talk about grant money and loan money and incentives for precision ag equipment, for holding data, for helping farmers really use artificial intelligence, all those kinds of things. So I think there's a real consideration of that. I also think that in the last farm bill and in this farm bill, there are many incentives, especially if you look at like the fruit and vegetable industry, where they were hurt first by a lack of labor before dairy, before now everybody else. But and they figured early on we're not going to be able to hire enough people to pick tomatoes or bing cherries or whatever it may be. And so they went to work on technology provisions in the research titles where they could come in and say, let's put extra incentives in for more research that could build better technology for especially specialty crop products. So I think we're already seeing that. I don't know, not that many years ago, I wrote on a little tomato picker and it had 10 people on it, and that's how they did it. And now you see them going through the fields and just looks like a little house sitting over the rows, and there you go. So I think we've made a lot of progress already, but more will come. You look at the technology on things like See and Spray, where it only supposedly sprays the weed versus sprays across the field. You obviously see the driverless tractors, you see the GPS kind of stuff working and all the data going in. So it's going on its own anyway, and there's a ton of private industry funding into it, but also a ton of funding through USDA. And I think that will continue, and that is driving agriculture forward.
Yeah, that's good. So what is your advice to the American producer through 2024 and beyond?
Well, my advice is to stay engaged. My goodness, I know it's hard. It's yeah, Washington D.C. and state capitals are not necessarily fun places right now, but as we get to be a smaller and smaller part of the industry, we have got to be even more engaged in telling agriculture story and making sure that members of Congress, members of state legislatures understand the issue, understand the impact on their constituents, et cetera. I mean, I'm still amazed that with agriculture being, whatever we want to define it as, 1% of the population, 2%, we box well above our weight class. But it's because farmers and ranchers are engaged. I mean, they're willing to drop what they're doing and come to Washington in the spring for a couple of days. They're willing to write an email or call a congressional staffer or, host a little fundraiser at their house for a legislator, et cetera. And it's that involvement that keeps us going. And I think that will continue to keep us going. But the fact is, we get fewer and fewer folks, especially elected to Congress, who understand agriculture. I mean, you already said I've been here a while, but when I came, everybody had a grandpa who was a farmer or an uncle where they had gone out and at least baled hay for the uncle in the summer, or a grandmother who had chickens and they, fondly remembered it. Well, that's not the case anymore. There are a lot of people that know absolutely nothing about agriculture. And so it's a challenge and it takes time. I can't just walk into an office and say, let me talk to you about estate taxes. I have to explain what's a farm and how does this affect them and why does a farmer have so much money invested in their land and those kinds of things. So we've all got to be better than we've been. And so we can continue to box above our weight.
Yeah. Yeah. Great advice. And one last question for you. Why do you serve the industry this way? And what are you most passionate about in everything you do?
Working with farmers and ranchers. I mean, we have partisanship, but I think the ag committees are still the most bipartisan. And I just think, I mean, it's my way of contributing to agriculture. Yes, I have a small farm, not big enough for me to make a living off of, but I have a small farm, but I'm not going to, farm full time ever. That's just not in my DNA right now. It didn't all fall together in the right way. So I think this is the way that I serve farmers, is trying my best to make sure, especially at the national level, that the laws and the regulations are things that help them. And, I can't imagine thinking doing it for some other sector would give me the same joy.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Where can people find you?
They can find me at Syngenta. It's Mary_K.Thatcher at Syngenta.com. They can probably look it up on the internet, to be honest, and find my name somewhere. But more than happy to take questions or comments or whatever. Help for sure.
Yes. Yeah. That's great. And of course, you're going to be at Women in Agribusiness Summit in Denver this fall. So I'm like I said before, I'm really looking forward to that. Hopefully, we have some developments by then. Maybe not, but but we'll see. Yeah, just thank you so much, Mary Kay. Great information. I think I could talk to you forever.
Forward to seeing you in Denver and looking forward to seeing other folks.
Awesome. And thanks to all who are watching or listening. If you want to learn more, all the links are provided in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe to North American Ag Spotlight on Spotify, Apple, Amazon Listen Notes. Or if you prefer video, you can find us on Rumble or Telegram. Or we're really wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you like this episode, I'd love it if you shared it. And have a great day.